My name is Noel-Leigh Cockney. I grew up both in Tuktoyaktuk and Inuvik, Northwest Territories, and I am a regional programmer and the safety coordinator for Dechinta.
I can go next. My name is Kyla Lesage. I'm Buntuck Gwitchin from Old Crow, Yukon, and Anishinaabe from Garden River, Ontario. But I grew up in Yellowknife and Sambakay, and that's where I call home. I went to Dechinta in fall 2018, so I'm a Dechinta alumni. And then I started working full-time for Dechinta in 2020, and I'm the land-based academic and regional outreach coordinator, but also just my title just doesn't cut it sometimes, but I feel like all of our titles don't cut it because we do so much amazing work outside of our work title. So we do have a little bit of everything. Messy.
Yeah, I can go next. So my name is Morgan Seta. I am Yellowknife's Dene First Nation. I grew up in Yellowknife and I currently live in Maple Ridge, BC, which is Coast Salish Territory. And I work with Dechinta as the digital media coordinator. So I kind of do a lot of work with the photography, filming, and just a lot of the digital media work. And yeah, I love what I do.
My name is Rena Mainville. I am Satu Dene and Métis on my mom's side from Tulita, and my biological dad is French and Irish from Quebec. I started with Dechinta as a volunteer when I was a student in university, and now I live and work in Sambakay at Dechinta.
Hello, my name is Rachel Cludere. I am Nahio Plains Cree, and I was born and raised in Sambakay, Yellowknife, on the land of the Yellowknife's Dene First Nation and North Slave Métis. And I still live here today. I've been working at Dechinta for, I don't know, like 3 months, and I have a working job title of land-based programmer and research coordinator. And I also am the project director for Supporting Wellbeing, which is a land-based mental health training.
And Kristen, we're just introducing ourselves. You want to go next?
Sure. You can hear me and see me just fine?
Yeah.
Awesome. Kristen Tenche, Suje, Sudakoi Gotsea, Te, Semo, Kathy Tenche, Uje, Seta, Gunnar Paulson, Uje. My name is Kristen Tenche. I am from Fort Simpson, Sudakoi. My mom is Kathy Tenche, and my father is the late Gunnar Paulson. I'm part of the Sudakoi First Nation in the Decho region of the Northwest Territories. I'm a Dechinta alumni. I took the program like 3 times. I was also on the board for a while. I also worked for Dechinta. There was a moment in my life where I lived every day for Dechinta. I now work for Decho First Nations as their regional health and wellness coordinator. I used to work in regional on the land programming and in lands and resources. I also work with Rachel on the Supporting Wellbeing Committee, and I'm one of the committee members. Masi Cho.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, again, just for you, Kristen, I already said this for everyone else, but like this is just a place that where we're able to share our stories of how we've gotten into the positions that we're in, and that way those stories will be able to be shared with everyone who listens to this panel to really see how broad of a spectrum that we all different paths we've taken into our positions that we have today. And yeah. Would anybody like to start their little spiel of how they've gotten to where they are now?
I can do it. Break
Awesome.
the ice. To get where I was, where my role now, I think what was crucial to me to getting here is Dechinta. When I went in fall 2018, I was going to school at the University of British Columbia. I was taking a political science and First Nations Indigenous Studies major minor. And I was really struggling at university, trying to follow along with my Indigenous Studies courses and not really understanding what it meant to be Indigenous or to be on the land, or to when we learned about like self-determination, what that meant. And then I really struggled because I never really had any Indigenous professors or mentors or anyone growing up. So while I was at school, I realized that I needed a change in my path. I needed something to help me continue my education and finish my degree. And Dechinta came up, and I remember seeing posters, and I was at UBC, and I'm from Yellowknife. I grew up in Yellowknife, and I was like, how is this in Yellowknife? Like, I've never heard of it, and I lived and grew up in Yellowknife. I never knew what the program was, and I was like, you know what? There's a sign, I'm going to apply. And so I applied for it. And then when I went to Dechinta, I realized that I lacked a lot of the skills that I really needed and wanted on the land. My family was removed from our community and our culture. My grandma went to residential school in the Klavik and was taken from home in Old Crow really young. So I never really grew up with any of the foundations of my culture or my Gwich'in background. And I really wanted to be able to go on the land for my grandma and go on the land for my family and reconnect. And so when I went to Dechinta, I was new to the bush. I'd never stayed on the land like that. I'd never known how to make a fire. I let alone knew how to chop wood. I would sit with the elders every night and learn how to chop wood. And I realized that there were so many things I didn't know, and that I was ashamed that I didn't know or grew up with. And so Dechinta kind of gave me that space and opportunity to learn. I felt like I was a baby almost. I was learning the basics. And then the next time I was trying to build up all these basics of like cutting fish or working on hides. And so Dechinta really gave me that final push I needed to graduate. I always say it, but I don't think I would have graduated university if it wasn't for my month on the land with the elders, knowledge holders, and professors. And then I went back to university for a semester, and I started critiquing all the political scientists and everything in my whole like faculty, and really seeing like, oh, there's so many gaps within how we think of the land. And then I graduated thinking I'd go to law school, and then I was like, no, I'm not going to continue this. I want to be on the land. I found that being on the land and being in the bush was where I felt the happiest and where I felt safe. And so I was saying this in an interview that I never felt book smart, but I always, once I got on the land, I started to feel like bush smart, and I could really pick up all those techniques and being on the land. And so after leaving Dechinta as a student, I knew that I wanted to come back and get on the land. And I started working just part-time. I was working at GNWT, and they paid for me to go work at Dechinta for a semester where I was able to teach students instead. And so I was slowly creeping back to Dechinta and what I really wanted to do. And I still say that I'm a learner, even though that was in 2018, but I've really been able to develop my skills on the land, working on hides, going fishing, cutting fish, setting up camp, going muskrat trapping. I'm obsessed with muskrat trapping. I went to Delaney and I was like, do you guys muskrat trap? And they're like, not really anymore. I'm like, do you want to go? And they're like, Kyla, not right now. It's too warm. But I'm just like, once I learn a skill, it's all because of Dechinta and the foundations of being on the land. And then I've also been able to speak in front of a camera. You can ask Morgan. I couldn't even look at a camera. I would fall asleep, fake sleep. I would not want to be there. And now I'm able to finally use have a voice and use it with advocating for land-based programming, and having other youth on the land. A lot of the work I do is to try and get more youth out on the land while also reconnecting. So trying to get more people to go through that path and that journey of not just Dechinta, but any land-based program is kind of what I see myself doing. And my role has changed. I'm always learning new things and teaching new things. And I'm definitely not the same person that I was before fall 2018. And yeah, I'm glad that I'm able to be on the land. And I was in Delaney, and everyone thought I was the person in town that knew how to work on hides. So they were coming to Paulina's house and Bernice's, where they're like, "Where's that girl who works on hides?" And I'm like, "I don't know who told you that I work on hides. Like, I'm really learning it." But I end up getting 3 hides gifted to me from one of the elders. So he's like, "Once you finish it, you keep it, but you just show me how you did it and like what it looks like." But I've never been to a community and have them reach out to me in that kind of way. So it was really, really powerful and amazing to see how much I've grown and how other people see that growth within me and what I do from working on the land with Dechinta. Yeah, I don't know. I could go on. So someone needs to like jump in and connect with it or anything. But yeah, I just did that podcast with Morgan, and it was a great way to kind of speak about my experience, but have the support of Morgan and the other people that were also in the interview. It was really great.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what we do on the land now is just like being able to like continually learn all these different skills, and no matter that it be a skill out on the land, or let alone being able to share our story in front of a camera. And it all really adds up. And I think like being able to show these stories for our younger generations and even like older generations to see, because like with so many of like myself and my friends and family around me, it's really hard for them to share these stories because they can't really articulate what it is that they're going through, both in mentally as well as physically. But like as we continue to do these things, it just like allows us to have those opportunities to share these things. And I think it's nice. It's really important for us to be able to do this, to really show how these skills in many capacities can really add into what we're doing and what we're trying to work towards in the future as well. And yeah, I mean, like the big thing that I really enjoy sharing is like being able to have people out on the land, no matter what their skill set is, because like we both said, like we're always learning, and being able to pass that knowledge on to those people, it just allows that next person to understand it as well as to pass it on to their peer groups around them as well. So yeah, thanks for sharing, Kyla.
Let's see.
Would anybody else like to go next?
Sure, I can go.
Cool.
I feel like I've had an unconventional journey to getting where I am. If you had asked my family when I was like 14, I don't know, like young, if I would ever do a job like this, they would be like, absolutely not. My mom would have to like send me outside for 20 minutes and like put on a timer, and I would stand at the patio door like this, through the glass patio door, just staring at her, watching the timer goes off, I just walk in. I was like, I refuse to be out there and enjoy myself. And now it's what I do all the time. Yeah, I started I guess strengthening my connection with the land by learning how to canoe when I was I think 17, and I learned how to canoe and I learned how to teach canoeing at the same time. And so I spent a lot of time on the water that summer when I was 17, and I was pretty much hooked immediately after that. I was teaching paddling all the time, and I was traveling to different communities teaching paddling. And I just felt like I like really belonged, and like I felt a sense of belonging out on the water. So then I ended up going to university, and I decided to tried starting a degree in ecotourism and outdoor leadership, but it didn't really fit with me. The story I tell to explain how well I didn't fit in is one time I went to a national park for one of my classes, and we had to teach our fellow students something while we were there. And I was like, "Oh, I'll teach them like how to harvest spruce gum." So I like harvested spruce gum and showed everyone how. And then we got back to town and I got my grade, and I got a D for lack of awareness, because you can't harvest things in national parks. And I didn't grow up in national parks, so I had no idea that this was a rule. And that's when I was like, okay, this doesn't work for me. So then I did guiding, and I guided for a number of years in the Mackenzie Mountains, and I experienced like a lot of racism and misogyny as a young Indigenous guide, and it was awful. And so that I stopped doing that. But the trip that made me realize how much that land-based programming and helping Indigenous peoples connect to their ancestral waterways and how important that was to me was I did guide a trip for Northern Youth Leadership, and their participants are primarily Indigenous from the NWT. And on that trip, we had 6 youth from Nunavut, and we had 6 youth from various communities in the NWT. And it was just, even though it was like one of the hardest trips I've ever done, it was the most rewarding, and it was so meaningful. And I was like, oh, this is exactly what I want to be doing, is helping people like strengthen the connections and have those feelings that I had when I first learned how to canoe. I finished my degree at the University of Victoria in a Bachelor of Commerce, which is also like not super traditional for many people who work in land-based programming. And I did a Bachelor of Commerce because at the time I was like, oh, I'll work in tourism. I know how to do the paddling stuff and be on the land, but I need to learn how to like run a business. It was a similar experience. I didn't really fit in with my fellow like classmates. Felt like I was constantly arguing like my point of view with people. I remember we took a sustainability class, and everyone hated it except for me. We were like finally learning about like how to have like good relationships with Indigenous peoples whose land you're running your business on, and people were like, we don't need to know this. And I was like, this is so interesting. And it was it was also just not a great fit for me, but I finished that degree. And then I was shortly after finishing that, maybe a year later, I was like at a hotel with Kyla and Justina Black, and they were telling me how awesome Dechinta was. And I was like, oh, I need to go there. This sounds amazing. And so I'm also an alumni of Dechinta, and I did a semester, and it was just like life-changing. I feel like it was the first time I went to school and felt like I didn't have to explain my worldview. It was just accepted, and not only was it expected, but it was expanded on. Like I got to learn so much more and expand my understanding of like certain concepts, and and how like the land informs a lot of those concepts for me. And I just felt like really supported and like in a community setting with the schooling, and I just really loved it. And so I was working in land-based programming before going to Dechinta, but it definitely like heightened my interest in continuing to work in land-based programming. And now I'm working at Dechinta, and I'm also working on my master's in Indigenous land-based education. And my work is focusing on like creating canoe programming or training from an Indigenous worldview and using basically focusing on the resurgence of Indigenous canoe practices. And that's me.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, yeah, like being able to hear, I mean, like for myself, I think I was kind of the opposite of yourself as you were starting to like refuse me to be outside. Like my grandparents and my mom couldn't really keep me inside because we were always outside. But like being able to see all these differences, yet finding the similar thing that we're doing now, it just really shows how we all just like are able to get into a path that we just continue to follow, and like we continue to learn, and like you said, yeah, you're outside all the time now, and yeah, it just like, I mean, us as Indigenous people, a lot, like at least in my own eyes, like I can see so many people when they start to have more time outside and be more comfortable being outside, they want to continue to do that. It's only when like the young people, the children and the little kids who are not just kept inside, but not really being shown how to be outside comfortably. And that's where a lot of people like stay inside. They don't have that comfortability, not only just traveling on the land, but like hunting and fishing and stuff like that. It just like something that we have to always continue to push towards for us to be able to feel comfortable being outside. And I mean, over time, that does happen, and it just shows that like with a lot of people, just like learning more about their culture as well as just their own homeland, they start to get outside more and more. But yeah, thanks for sharing, Rachel. Morgan, Kristen, or Arena, would one of you three want to continue on?
I can go.
Great.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess my journey or career kind of started when I went to film school in Vancouver in about 2014, 2015. And I thought that I had started like my post-secondary journey a little bit late. I was about 21. So I took a little bit of time to figure out what I really wanted to do and how I wanted to get there. So a friend of mine went to this school in Vancouver and I applied and got in. And so throughout my college experience, it was incredibly isolating. From the beginning, there was only like a couple of girls and it was mostly guys. And by the end, I was the only girl who graduated because we were a class from the beginning to the end. And when I was going to college, that was really when I kind of like radicalized and just kind of really like accepted my own culture, my own identity. And I feel like a lot of people kind of go through that journey in college and university, and that it just really like heightened my awareness of all of these like social issues. And yeah, I was just really passionate about being Indigenous and amplifying Indigenous voices. Specifically while I was going through film school, I was like, this is something that I can use. This is a skill that I can bring back to my community and teach other youth, inspire people, get some of the elders and community members to tell their stories and document it for future generations. And when I graduated film school, it wasn't like an immediate, like I'm back in my community, I'm filming, I'm behind the camera. I took a couple of years to kind of figure out how I like wanted to use my diploma and my education. And my childhood friend, actually, Justina Black, she posted on Facebook about helping out with a documentation project. And I was like, I can totally help out with that. I'm itching to use my my wealth of film school knowledge after running a candle business for a year. So I went back home and immediately just like fell in love with Dechinta. Like it was the first fish camp that I really started working with Dechinta. I did like 1 or 2 days doing an artist retreat, and I kind of like got a foot into what Dechinta does. And then we did the fish camp, where I was asked to come back and to do some more work with Dechinta. And that was right before the pandemic kind of rolled across the world and just changed everyone's lives. But it was such a perfect time for me to kind of just get in with Dechinta, especially since so much work is now digital, so much work is now online. Being able to document a lot of what we were able to do before the world shut down was just, it was really important to keep a lot of our programming going. So that's just kind of how I I just really fell into my role and got really comfortable within Dechinta. And I've been with them ever since as their digital media coordinator. It's been really amazing to be able to, like I mentioned, use my film education, which I really believe is like a skill. Like it's something that I believe, especially for Indigenous youth, POC youth, to kind of take back the ability to tell our own stories. It's incredibly important, very powerful. And I love the ability to be able to play a small role in doing that for my own community, because I am Yellowknife Zene, and working back in Yellowknife where I grew up, but I don't really live there. I work there part-time now, thanks to Dechinta. Being able to go back home so often is it's such a blessing. Like I just got back from being there for 2 months, and already I'm like, when am I going back? Like, what am I, do I have my flights booked yet? Like, just, and planning it throughout the year. Like, I feel like I'm going to be in Yellowknife more than I'm going to be back at my house this year. And I couldn't be happier. So and it's also this thing as well, where I didn't really grow up connected to our traditional teachings. My mom left the North when I was in about grade 5 or 6 to pursue post-secondary, which is this really great circle moment for me to be able to work at this center that has post-secondary options for people like my mom who wouldn't have had to leave the North, or potentially could have sought options within her own community, and we could have stayed, and I probably could have learned things that I'm now learning as a 27-year-old adult. But I'm just so incredibly thankful that I get to learn things like my territories, the islands, how to cut fish, muskrats, reconnecting with so many of the community members. When I first started working with Dechinta, it was always, who's your mom? Who's your mom? Like, whose family are you? And now it's just like, how's your mom? How are you? Like, when they see me again, whenever I come back, it's they know which family I come from, and it's not really like a questioning thing, and I just feel really accepted, and being able to just forever learn is so amazing. And yeah, I'm really grateful to continue that work. That's me.
Awesome. Thank you, Morgan. Yeah, I think for us to really not just be integrated into a community of our homes, but for myself, being from up here in Inuvik and Tuk, like working with Dechinta for over 2 years now, just like, yeah, it is really a big part of it, just like being a part of this community and being a part of this family. Pretty much just like going from, like you said, Morgan, like who are you, who your family, and then like how going into how your family is doing. And it's always fun to be able to integrate yourself in different communities in that way, so that you're able to really continue to build on those connections, because that's exactly how our ancestors had survived. It's not just being a part of our own families, we had to work with other families to get to where we are today, because otherwise, especially here in the north, like we've had to work together a lot of the times to, and yeah, some families might dispute and have little arguments or tensions between us, but when it comes down to it, like we always have to work together to continue on to where we are today. And I see that a lot in like our community of Dechinta, just like being very welcoming into that space, and really having it as a nice family. And yeah, we can continue on. I'm just taking notes, and then after we all share a little bit about our past, I can pick and choose what like a lot of our connections are, and try to dive deeper into those little topics there. So yeah, Rena and Kristen, one of you two want to continue on here?
Sure. So I guess my experience or journey with Dechinta started by having like family members that were students, and then learn about their experience. I had already known about Dechinta, but and the program, but not so much until I like had heard family member stories and experiences. And yeah, so I went, and I guess it also started when I went away to school. I wanted to go to school to be a teacher. I wanted to do my Bachelor of Education, but I couldn't get into university because I didn't graduate high school. So I think I did some upgrading, and then I think I was 21 when I went to college. I went to Langara College in Vancouver, and I took Indigenous studies, and it was such a like amazing and like healing learning experience. The professors were like mostly Indigenous, or there was like one non-Indigenous professor, and she was like really well connected and respected by the Nunavut community, and had done a lot of law work up there and help with their law program. Anyways, it was just such an amazing experience. Like there was just so much knowledge from the teachers and understanding. And then I had met so many people who were like going back to school because they didn't like what they were doing, or the degree they had. And I was like, what? Like I can't imagine having a degree and not using it. So I went to college for 2 years, and then I moved back home, and I worked in the school as an education assistant or student support assistant for a year. And I just saw like these major gaps when it came to culture and language, like revitalization and continuation. And I especially saw it in the earlier years, junior kindergarten, like they're not required to take like Indigenous language and culture classes. So like they can opt out of that, which is like, that's like vital time for the little ones to learn their language and their culture and to have exposure. And so I decided not to pursue my Bachelor of Education, but instead I went to Capilano University and completed my Bachelor of Early Childhood Care and Education. And when I went to university, it was such a different experience from college. It was like day and night. It was just so like similar to Kyla, like I was critiquing them and it was just, it made me advocate and speak up more for like Indigenous children and families and communities in that program. And it made me share, like have a louder voice, I guess, when it came to that. And then around this was around the time my cousin was in Dechinta, and when I was in university, everyone kept talking, the teachers and students kept talking about like our graduating project that we would have to complete in our 4th year. And they're already talking about it in the 1st year. And after hearing about my cousin's experience, I was like, I want to do my graduating project at Dechinta. And I just was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it or when, like, are the dates are not going to align. And it's just, I don't know how it's going to happen, but that's what I want to do. And I was always like in all my assignments and presentations, always speaking about culture, language, like continuation and revitalization, and like having stronger communities and then the pandemic happened and I got to come home and work remotely and do school remotely. And so it was like almost just by chance that I did get to end the fall semester, because I was like logistically, like how as a student I would never be able to afford the flight to come home just to go to Dechinta and then not work for 5 weeks or 4 weeks. Like it was just so much that I was like, I don't know how I would be able to do it. And then the pandemic happened and I was already at home, and like my teachers had all agreed. I think I had to withdraw from one of my classes. It was a math class and they were like, there's no way you can miss 4 weeks. But my other classes were like, you can do all the work like without internet and then submit it when you get back or whatever. And so I got to, and I was like friends with Justina and I had met Kyla. So I knew both of them. So I was able to like become a volunteer that way so that I could complete my graduating project. So I was like a volunteer at their fall 2019 semester and like just built relationships with everyone and got well connected with the Dechinta family. And then I was asked to come back and work at their hide camp in the summer. And I was able to complete a practicum that was canceled because of the pandemic. It was like the last thing I needed to graduate. And so I got to join their hide camp, and then I graduated school and I started working full-time with the GNWT. I was an early childhood development officer with Health and Social Services. And then, but I was still like staying connected with Kelsey and chatting with her and everyone else. And then Kelsey she had offered me a job, and I was like a full-time job, and I was like, that's crazy. Like I have a government job. I can't quit my government job for that. Like I was like, that's the only place people work in the Northwest Territories with the GNWT. There's nothing else. And she was like, and it was weird because I had like built relationships, like the way Dechinta is set up is like, there's no participating in it without relationship building. So I felt comfortable, and I just told that to Kelsey, and I was like, that's like, I was so honest with her, like, you're crazy, you're asking me to quit my government job. Like that's literally like growing up in the Northwest Territories. Those are the only jobs that are seen as like secure, I guess. And I was just completely honest with her, and she was like, "Oh," and she just presented me like, "We're just as secure as the government." And I was like, "Okay," and I was like, "Well, I can't run a whole program." And then I was like, "I can't run a whole program by myself." And she's like, "No, I've seen you do it." And I was like, "What? When?" And so like because I was able to have like those open conversations with her, I was able to comfortably um make the transition from like quitting and starting a new job. And I grew up in the Sawtoo, and I grew up going out on the land all the time and very connected. That was to the land, and that was just something that was a part of growing up there that it's like not part of the education system. And so when I was in school, all the research, like there's like, you know, so much research for getting children and youth outside and out on the land and building those relationships so that we can live well together and live well with the land. And that's just what like Dechinta embodies in their children and youth program. Is like it's completely immersed in community and on the land, like traditional and cultural skills and practices, and like strengthening relationships with elders, knowledge holders, community members. And listening to Kyla talk about how she's like, she started just by making fires, and then each time there was a camp, she would like it build on her skill. And I was actually just writing a report yesterday talking about what we do at our camps, and I was like, the amazing thing of having like you know, some of like what we do overlaps. So like when we have children and youth that have been to other camps, like each time they join, they get to like build on their skill or build on their and continue to learn. And there was like one day at our winter camp where we hadn't put the net in yet, and I had a group of children, and we were going to go ice fishing in the net hole. And the way and it was just me and the children, there was nobody else around. And the way they gathered around the hole and picked up the shovel and started shoveling out ice. And I was like watching, and I was like, exactly like our bush experts and like elders, the way they do it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this, like when people say for the next generation, I was like, it's right here. They're just picking it up and carrying on. It was just the sweetest thing ever. Yeah, and that's how I started working with Dechinta as a land-based children and youth education coordinator.
Awesome. Thank you, Rena. I mean, like for myself, like it's really fun to see you working with the kids, especially in our semester programs, because like with being able to do that, it really creates this holistic kind of community in our semesters and in our programs, because that being able to have those multi-generations in the same spot just allows us to continue to build not just the knowledge of the young people in what they're watching and participating in, but also like for our elders and even our own ages, like being able to play around with the kids and be outside with the kids just allows us to have that more youthful experience, being able to use our imaginations and being able to think differently instead of just that linear path that a lot of us are taught in schools. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun being able to have all those different generations for us to be able to have that holistic experience. And thanks for sharing, Rena. Kristen, do you want to continue us on here?
Sure. Thanks everyone so far for sharing all of your guys' journey. It's been really interesting. I know some of your guys' stories, but not all of yours, and a couple new faces. So it's really nice to sit and listen. A lot of commonalities, a lot of similarities, I think, in a lot of our stories. When you said to like talk about how we got into the positions that we're in, I started to think about it like as in my role at Dechinta First Nations, because that's what I do 9 to 5. But then I also have many other roles and like positions, I guess, in my life. I'm a wife, I'm an auntie, I'm a community member. I do other things like I sit on supporting well-being, but I have lots of different like interests, and I have many different positions and wear many different, I guess, hats in my community and in my life. And I think that where I am in my life is accumulation of what has happened in my past and the experiences and stuff that I've had from when I was a little girl to a teenager to like a young adult to an adult and everything combined. And I'm not going to tell my whole life story because that's a lot of life storytelling to tell. But I grew up in a mixed background. My father is non-Indigenous. He's Canadian, Icelandic, a mixture of like all sorts of different things. My mother is Dechinta NAISA. She's the Whitewater First Nation. And so I grew up in both, like, I guess, kind of worlds. I grew up a lot with my non-Indigenous grandmother in little small town Saskatchewan, where there weren't many other Indigenous children, and most of my family were non-Indigenous. And so I didn't often see myself reflected in the mirror. I would often look in the mirror and wonder why my skin wasn't like other people's skin. And I would spend time with my Indigenous family, but it wasn't as much as my non-Indigenous family. And I ended up living with my father in Wati in the Tlicho area. And it was there that I really started to see like Indigenous culture. And my friends would all speak Tlicho. Their families would go out on the land together, and they were like so close knit and tight knit. They always welcomed me into their households and into their homes. And I just really loved, I guess, the culture around like being on the land and their language and everything. And I felt like really disconnected from mine because I'm Dechinta Dene. My family is from Tuktoyaktuk First Nation, and I didn't get to spend that much time with them like as I was growing up. And so there's like a huge gap in there. And fast forward to my older years of being a teenager, trying to like figure stuff out, still feeling like super disconnected from land and not really understanding things, and trying to like make my way through this world where when I was growing up as a teenager and like as a kid, it wasn't very cool to wear Indigenous artwork, and it wasn't cool to like state that you were Indigenous, or it wasn't like this really amazing thing. I feel it's really shifted. I proudly wear earrings where maybe 15, 20 years ago, I probably wouldn't. It would be non-Indigenous culture that would be highlighted and at the forefront. And so grappling with those types of things when you know as a teenager that you're part of both worlds and you're trying to be proud of, I guess, just figure out life. Fast forward to being an adult, working in my small town, finally got back to my mom's area and trying to like reconnect with all of my culture and my family and just where my part of my blood is from. I was working for a small company in tourism and like essentially doing like bookkeeping type of stuff. And I was accepted into the Dechinta program. And at that time, I was really dabbling in like local community politics. So I think I was on the Fort Simpson District Education Authority, or maybe through the Koi First Nation. I became a council member. And then I took Dechinta, and it was my first time that I was on the land for a month at one time. And similar to your guys' stories, first time I was able to like really learn how to like chop wood and explore my identity as an Indigenous person and learn how to cut a fish. Got to go on my first like moose hunt and cut a moose for the first time. And just all these amazing experiences, but also really becoming more comfortable with my skin and realizing why I wasn't comfortable in my own skin because of this like a legacy of colonization and residential schools and all these really difficult things that you don't grow up learning about, especially people in my generation. We didn't go to school and learn about residential schools and all these types of things. Of course, we knew about it, but you really didn't learn too much about it. And it was really at Dechinta that I started to understand more about why I could be the way I was, why I could potentially be struggling with addictions and all of these things. Wasn't just because Kristen and I had a hard time and I was like weak. No, it was so much more than that. Like this whole societal thing. And so that was my first experience at Dechinta. It's pretty like intense. It's pretty like hardcore, and I knew I wanted to go back. I came back to my hometown. I essentially decided after a little bit of time, you know what, I want to pursue my education even more. I want to take social work, and I'm going to go to Yellowknife to do it because Aurora College offered it. And so I went back to school. I did things backwards. Was married, had a house, just bought a house, got a new vehicle, and moved to Yellowknife and went to school while my husband stayed behind. So I literally left my whole town, my life here to go pursue an education. I wanted to take social work because I knew that I wanted to help my community. I wanted to like help myself too. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to come back and try to help make a difference, because being in my community and like local politics, I could see that there was huge gaps of our own people kind of leading the way in health and wellness and on the land programming and all sorts of things, right? And then I decided to go back to Dechinta and take a Decho River semester. We paddled from Fort Providence to Fort Good Hope. It was like a month long of 20 something of us, ebbed and flowed the amount of people that were on trip at a time, because we had different staff that would come on and off. But the youngest was 3 years old, and at any given time we could have an elder that was like 60 something. It was the most amazing trip I've ever been on. I got to spend so much time in my own home territory on the river that my ancestors used to travel on, that like sustained them, that just like everything, a river is so important in this area, like many waterways for all sorts of different people. And I also took another program actually in the Mackenzie or the Chinle in the Kaska area. So in the Mackenzie Mountains along the Yukon and NWT border, I took part in Indigenous Guardians pilot program with Dechinta, which was another life-changing experience. I guess another huge commonality is every time we talk about Dechinta, we say it's been a life-changing experience. And as a Dechinta alumni, I think a lot of us can say that we'll choose maybe our favorite stories to try to explain how life-changing it's been, but it can be really difficult because it really does change you in so many different ways. And just it's hard to sometimes verbalize how much the program and the atmosphere and the things that happen when you're on the ground and taking the program, how much they affect you and change you. And yeah, so yeah, lots of different experiences. I actually would say that Dechinta is part of the reason that I'm sober today. I've been sober for like 5 years after drinking and doing drugs and just really struggling with addictions for a large part of my life. It was partly through Dechinta and the experiences that I gained through there that I realized that I didn't want to live that lifestyle. It wasn't for me anymore. And that I'm not the type of person that can have one drink and then just go on their merry way. I'm the type of person that is going to have 20 drinks or drink all night. And just the lifestyle was not for me and I couldn't do it anymore. And I think Dechinta really helped provide an area where it was like the first time I was sober for a month at a time to really like look into what sobriety felt like and what it would mean for me to live a sober life. And so now I'm the Decho First Nations Regional Health and Wellness Coordinator. I've also taken part in other programs, I guess, after Dechinta. I was part of the Jane Glasgow Northern Fellowship, where I was able to really do some community-based research and look at addictions programming in my home community of Fort Simpson, Inuvialuit. So I think all of those experiences really helped give me some, I guess, additional skills and insight into like what it's like to walk in two worlds, to try to be okay in both of those worlds, to try to understand, I guess, a bit more how important both of those worlds are. We live in a society where we're never going to be completely land subsiding people again, but that's a huge part of our culture. And I think that that's the life that we have to live with, is we need to learn how to like work in the Western world. And to me, it's important for me to learn how to be in the Indigenous world and to connect with that side of me, because I'm both. I think we're all, like, in a sense, need to operate in both ways. And for me to feel whole, I need to be able to work for an organization like Decho First Nations, work for an organization like Decho First Nations, and continue to like work in the Western world. And I think Dechinta really helped provide some of that knowledge and that insight as in their programs. Yeah. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And yeah, I think a lot of like what we've all been saying, like you all have been saying so far, it's just like being able to get into that spot where, and I've mentioned this already as well, but being able to walk in like both worlds, just like what you exactly just said, Kristen, just like going from one spectrum of really learning our culture and how our ancestors lived, and to today of how we're able to combine two things. And I think that's a really big commonality between all of us, is like trying to figure out not only learning big parts of our culture, but also being able to tie it into our lives today. And I think you put really well, Kristen, just like saying that, yeah, we do have to work with both sides of those worlds. It's yeah, it's really hard for anybody to actually live out on the land full time unless like you have the space and the time to be able to do that. And a lot of us today, like we all have our own jobs, and we have to up those things to live in our communities and their towns and their cities. And yeah, I think like being able to in both worlds is an important thing for all of us to learn, and for our future generations to learn as yeah. Yeah, so for myself, like I mentioned, I grew up both in Tuktoyaktuk and Inuvik, Northwest Territories. I grew up both right along the coast of the Arctic Ocean, as well as the Mackenzie Delta. My whole life, I've actually been raised into like really being out on the land, which I'm very grateful and thankful for, with my grandparents and one other cousin. So basically, there's us that we were always out at our camps, and one camp is which is right along the coast of the Arctic Ocean, where my family has a camp, and where just this past fall I was actually able to start building a sod house, a traditional sod house up here, with a bunch of high school students. And that is exactly where I spent the vast majority of my life, which really allowed me to be able to be into the position that I am now, to share a lot of the knowledge of just camp life, as well as fishing and hunting and stuff like that. But when I moved to Inuvik, started spending more time in a place called Husky Lakes between Tuk and Inuvik. and living out there a lot, just learning how to travel along the lakes and little creeks and streams that we have that are in between the lakes is allowed me to really understand just in different topography to travel through, going from the coast basically fully wide open on the Arctic Ocean to the more hilly and lakey kind of traveling farther inland. And same thing around Inuvik, well, just being able to travel across throughout the Delta and learn more of that, trying to figure out all the different channels. The Mackenzie Delta is very vast, it's very huge. Trying to navigate all the little channels and streams and creeks, and we're all going around all the little islands was challenging, but as time just gone on and just like being able to learn those pathways and yeah. And basically after school, well, actually through high school, I started to take outer bound courses where the Inuvialuit government up here, they started to work with Outer Bound to take a 2-week trip down the Horton River, which is farther east of where I am now, and really dealing with a lot of the Outer Bound's curriculum of leadership, conflict resolution, group dynamics, and stuff like that. And yeah, and actually being able to learn on those, because I went on that trip 3 times, and the first one was just student. Then the next 2 were more as mentors for the younger students that were going on the trip, just for them to someone else their age or a little bit older to really have some sort of mentorship instead of just learning from the instructor that came up from the southern provinces. And yeah, which really set well in both not only learning more about how my grandparents, particularly my grandfather, traveled throughout the whole Arctic region. He spent a lot of time on the Horton River, which is really fun to see that side of the land that my grandfather had spent so much time in, and hearing stories before going out and after going out there, and also learning all their leadership styles in the programs that they run throughout the whole Outer Bound program. And after graduating high school, I actually went down to in Wisconsin in the United States, and being able to do that allowed me to get into more of that outdoor education. So like those outdoors really into that outdoor education realm. And in the college, I was actually able to get a minor in Native American Studies as well. So I was able to interact with different reservations that were around the school. We had 3 different reservations that were really close. So like being able to learn from the elders and just the local people of how they do a lot of their gather, like the syrup to make or the sap to create maple syrup, as well as ricing that they in Great Lakes of Lake Superior there, and just how to do a lot more hunting of in a different region of the deer and the grouse and the other waterfowl. So for myself, that college experience wasn't really that tough because I was able to integrate myself into a lot of the culture that was around me. And I was very grateful being very welcomed into those spaces as well. And yeah, I think being able to have those people and those experiences really allowed me to have a very comfortable and very welcoming spot where I was able to not just learn the traditional college and university kind of classes, but being able to create a space for myself to really get outside and really be able to integrate myself in those communities. And after like being able to do that, again, just like how my grandparents have really raised me, just like being able to opportunities, not just learning from my own family, but learning from other people around us, and really being able to find those spots where you're able to make it a holistic experience, I guess. I know that college, university can be really hard for a lot of people, but like for myself, been really pushed to really find those opportunities, really make it a worthwhile experience for throughout the full 4 years of actually getting into being able to finish the college. And after I went to college, I started working for an organization called the National Outdoor Leadership School, where I was instructing backpacking, rock climbing, and whitewater canoeing courses, both like mostly down Wyoming and Utah, but also being able to do courses in Columbia as well as in the Yukon, just outside of Whitehorse there. And having worked there for about 6 years, just gaining a lot of different knowledge of logistics, especially like those expedition style kind of backpacking and canoeing courses. And yeah, which really allows me to, in my position now at Dechinta, of like really being able to not just starting to create my own programs for the region, but also being able to help out Dechinta and other programs that we do down in the southern part of the territory. And yeah, I guess for myself, it sounds really an easy way into my position of like gaining all of the knowledge, but for myself, it just like that's exactly how my grand really instilled everything in myself. It just really finding those opportunities to make my every step in my own life really worthwhile, and to be able to get into a position where I'm able to start to help other people, not just learn about my culture, Inuvialuit culture, but also help out programs to cultures. And yeah, I think it's allowing myself to be a well-rounded person, to be able to not just think about those logistics, but also like really being out on the land. And for myself, that's where I'm most comfortable, is out on the land and teaching people those different skills, whether that be making a fire or cutting wood or cutting fish and everything like that. I think like being able to have those, having grown up with that, I am one of those lucky people that I have done that and continue to have done that my whole life. And that's for myself, I feel I'm in this position to really pass that knowledge on, just like my grandparents and my mom have. And yeah, that's a little bit of my own story into how I've gotten into the position. I think like a lot of commonalities that we have touched on, I think not so much of a commonality for myself, but like just being for everyone else in the panel here, like with the college and the university of just really not just feeling that isolation, but also like not really fitting in. I'm wondering if people can explain how that those feelings have really hindered their experiences in university and college, and how you've all been able to overcome those that barrier of not just feeling accepted or feeling that you fit into those spaces. Would anybody like to start? I know it's a little hard, but it's, I think, for our future generations and other people who are trying to get into college or university at an older age as well. I think, I think it'll be good for them to hear these little tidbits or stories that come from you all.
I can say a few things.
Yeah.
Don't do it. Just kidding.
You're not
Just
kidding.
go to Dechinta.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, just kidding. If you do need in a lot of positions in life, and like I was saying earlier, we do need to be like versed in both. I feel like our generation has like that added pressure of really being versed in both ways, like go to college and go to university, but go in the bush and learn how to like chop down a tree and all these things. But it is doable. So I went to UNBC for like a year and a half, the University of Northern British Columbia and Prince George, and I didn't finish. I'm like, but man, I miss home. I want to be in the North. I'm in like Indigenous studies, and I'm not even learning about like my own people, and I don't even know if the professor's Indigenous. Like, this is not, I'm in a room with like 50 people. This isn't the education that I want. That didn't work for me. It works for tons of other people, and tons of other people can be successful in that. So I came back home, and then I went to Dechinta, and it was like the first time I got like an A+ in a university accredited course, and it felt so amazing. It really like made me feel so much better that I could do this. I could go to university. I could do these things. I became more comfortable in my own skin and felt like better prepared. And I did, like, I went to Royal College and got my diploma in social work. Northern, I think that it like Aurora College is a Northern institute too, but it's still an institute. And I think that Dechinta really helped me prepare for being comfortable and being like, you know what, I want to go to college and university and I can do it. And so, yeah, I think everybody has their own path. Sometimes it's college and university down south. Sometimes it's not. Just trust the process and try to find your path and like work hard and just pursue your passions. If you want to go to school, go to school.
Definitely, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like I have the same feeling. I wish I like bridged graduating high school and then went to Dechinta and then went to university, because I went from like growing up in Yellowknife and doing my schooling there, and I don't know what it was in me where I was like, yes, I'm going to leave and I'm going to go to Vancouver. I'm going to go to a big city. I'm going to go to one of the biggest institutions in Canada. And I was like so ambitious when I think of myself, and I don't know who I was when I like think back at applying. Oh my gosh, all my emails. But I do wish that I had something there to support me, because when I went to the University of British Columbia, the population of the university and campus itself was bigger than the population of the Northwest Territories. And I felt so small. I felt like my degree and what I was learning and what I was saying, none of it really mattered, because I was just that one student in that 200-person lecture hall listening to one professor talk about like Indigenous people in a different way than I had grown up with, going to like a fish camp with school. And so I really did feel small, and I really didn't say much at university. I was really quiet. I wasn't comfortable speaking about my people or speaking about who I was as an Indigenous person. I never grew up with pride with being Indigenous because I never knew what that felt like. I faced a lot of racism when I was really little, and I always hated how brown, I was a little brown kid, they always called me, but I always felt uncomfortable in my own skin. And so when I went to university, I didn't know how to feel pride or how to feel proud of who I am and where I come from. And I didn't really have spaces at university where I felt safe for the first few years talking about my experiences or how I felt isolated in a huge university or alone without family or community. And I think it was in my third year where I finally reached out, and I was going to the Longhouse, the First Nations Longhouse, and learning with other really radical Indigenous community member or like students, and we were going to protest. I was protesting pipelines, and I was on national news, and my dad was a RCMP at the time, and he's looking, he's like, "Are you at school?" I'm like, you know what, this is my school now. And my grandma used to protest pipelines, and she actually held a sign in Whitehorse when they were trying to do fracking. It said, "Frack off." And I found the exact same sign. Someone handed it to me at a protest, and I was like, oh my God, this is fate that I'm here holding a sign like my grandmother protesting. And then that's kind of where I found my voice. And but I really lacked the support of being away from family, which is why I wish Dechinta was my main step, because they always said, what is it, B's or C's get degrees or D's get degrees. And I was like, you know what, that I'm passing, I'm doing great. And I didn't realize that that was not actually like what it means to get through university, that you should be able to fulfill yourself and fulfill your education and feel like you're doing something meaningful for you. And I just like never had that when I was there. And then I went to Dechinta, and I was getting A's and like A pluses, and I'd never seen a plus by an A in my entire life. And I was like, was it because I caught a fish? And Leanne Simpson's just laughing. She's like, yeah, it was. You caught a fish really well. Here's an A plus. But I had never got that feeling of I'm doing something, I'm accomplishing something, and that my work or my voice or my skills are meaning something. And then when I went back to university, I only wrote about Dechinta in all my classes. I had all poli-sci classes, and all the time I was like, Dechinta, Dechinta, Dechinta. Like all my professors were like, do you want to do a presentation on Dechinta? I'm like, sure, I don't really know. I just went there for 4 weeks. And so I did presentations as a student with my peers of what Dechinta was. And my biggest paper was critiquing consent with the land and ownership of land and how we think of contested territory. And I went to Glenn, I was like, Glenn, I'm gonna critique this political scientist and say like consent isn't like, we're not receiving consent from the land if we're not actually connecting and returning to the land. And he was like, okay, like how are you gonna do that? I'm like, I'm gonna use this person, critique that. And I sat at a coffee shop with Glenn, and he's like, who is this person? What is she doing? And I wrote this paper, and to this day, he's like, I'm so proud that you wrote that. Like no one's criticized that. And I got an A+ on the paper, and my prof was like, can we publish it? And I'd never received that kind of feedback or feeling like I was doing something. And then I ended up publishing part of the piece in our Dechinta book that's coming up. But I do really see like Dechinta was there to finish my journey with me. Like I wouldn't have finished without having the Dechinta team and family and professors hold me up, because I was really far down. I was really trying to figure out who I was and why I was at university. And I mean, like I was gonna go to law school, and now I see that working on the land is where I feel the best. And I might return. Everyone's always like, are you gonna return for a master's? And I was like, not unless it's at Dechinta and that I can still work here. And they're like, okay, like that's a lot to ask, but I definitely do. That's why I advocate so much for Dechinta and other students, is being able to either bridge through a high school to university, or if you're really struggling, to come back and reconnect and re-find the meaning of why you are going to university. Even if you're not doing it right out of high school, if you're taking a few years like everyone, that's also what I would recommend. I think if you're really jumping into it, I'm lucky I was just like, I'm going to be a political scientist. And I don't know what that means. But yeah, I definitely relate to that. And I definitely think university is important, but being able to fulfill a university degree without leaving home, without having to leave your children at home if you have kids, and without having to feel disconnected is the way that I would say would be the best. And it's gonna transform you. I think, as we all mentioned, it transformed who we are. And yeah, I don't regret going to university. I think it was part of my journey, but I regret how I went into it. So there's definitely lots of learning and listening to everyone's experiences, and whoever's listening to these ones will be able to kind of see where they fit in. And maybe you'll end up at Dechinta, and then next thing you know, you'll be cutting fish and getting graded by elders instead of sitting in a which I don't know, that sounds better to me.
Yeah, for sure. I think like with this thing is really trying to make any of those situations work for yourself as well. And like, I think that's a lot of the commonalities between not just being comfortable in those, being able to create those opportunities where you're able to learn from wherever you're going, be it at a university or college or at Dechinta, because I'm sure in their history have had students that never really thrived in that situation because they likely weren't comfortable in that situation. And like both Kristen and Kyla said, it's just like being able to find what works for you to get into those, not just positions, but into a space in your own life of where you want to go. Yeah. Rachel, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna add on to thinking about like universities and what Kyla was saying about like taking time to think about what you want to do. And I think that's so important. Like, because I have a late birthday, I graduated university when I was 17. And when I graduated, I was like expected to leave my home and my community and my family and go down south to go to school. And I was not ready. And so I took a year off, and everyone gave me a heck about it. They're like, people who take a year off never go back to school. They never finish. Like, you should just keep going. And I was like, no, like I'm too young for this. I can't do this. And in my year off, like when I graduated high school, I was like, I'm going to be a marine biologist or a biologist. Like, that's what I wanted to do for school. But then for my year off, I worked at my friend's family business, which is like a canoe school in the summer, and in the winter they do like cultural programming. And after like 1 year of working for them, it like totally changed what I wanted to do for school. I knew for sure like I wanted a job where I would be on the land, and that was my goal. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I ended up going to business school thinking like I'll work in tourism and be on the land all the time. But it wasn't interesting. Like, I wasn't that interested in business school. I was like a nerd, so I like an overachiever. So I tried really hard, but I didn't know you could enjoy school until I did my semester at Dechinta and we read things, and I was like, whoa, like I actually like connect with this. And people were always talking about like thinking critically, but I feel like I didn't start like really thinking critically until I started going to Dechinta, because I don't know, it seemed more like I related with the articles a lot more, and so I could think critically about what they were talking about. And in my master's, I find that too. Like, if you had asked me if I was ever going to do a master's, I would have been like, no, I'm doing a business degree so that I never have to go back to school. And that was like my main motivation for the business degree. I was like, people get business degrees and they don't have to go back. They don't have to like get a master's to get a job. So I'm just going to do this. And now I'm like doing a master's because I'm like really interested in like the learning more about land-based education and like doing my own project and research on it. So yeah, I definitely think it takes time to figure out what you want to do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in like similar ways, like with all my papers and stuff like that in college, like I really related my own upbringing up here into a lot of those papers, because it's just what allowed me to really get to that critical thinking, as well as being able to share my own story of like how people live up here in the north. Like for people down south into the states and the southern provinces, like not very many people know how it is that we live up here. And being able to share a lot of that, not just with my schooling, but also like where I work as well. It just allowed myself to integrate my culture into those conversations, and not just being able to use that in the college I went to, just like it allowed me to create those connections with the people as I was learning from them. And they were always really interested in hearing my own stories of how we did things, of hunting and fishing from up here. So, and yeah, like being able to create those spaces where you're able to feel comfortable around those people, and also feel comfortable with sharing your own culture and your background. Because I think like being in those institutions, it can be very intimidating, especially if you have to travel away from home, which all of us have done. And we've had to get into a space where we had to make it work for ourselves. And it seems like in one way or another, that's exactly what we all had done to get to the space, to get to the places that we're in. And yeah, like with that, I think another commonality is just like what we have talked about, is just like creating a space where not only where we're working, but also in being very connected to the land. I think it would be nice to hear everyone's like how you all are creating your job to bring you out on the land. Yeah, I think that'd be a fun little thing for people to hear, just like how it is that we're creating our situations into learning our culture and learning out on the land. Morgan, did you want to say something?
Yeah. So it's really kind of unique for me as well, being Yellowknives Dene, to do a lot of our programming in my traditional territory, like where my ancestors have lived since time immemorial, and to feel really connected to the lands throughout the work that we do is just really special. I, like I previously mentioned, didn't really know a lot of the things like how to chop wood and gutting fish and all of those kinds of things, and to kind of use specifically my job at Dechinta, which is I do a lot of like the photography work when we're doing programs, and some like video work. So typically I'm attached to a camera, or just like standing near my gear, and don't really engage that often, but lately I've made like a concerted effort to make sure that I get in there, I get my hands dirty, I learn from my elders that are like like literally my family. I'm related to like more than half the staff, like all of the anyone who works with us who's Yellowknives Dene, I'm related to them. So it's really amazing to be able to like reconnect in that sense. The term reconnecting is almost like a taboo now within like Native communities, and my situation is just like very unique. Like from as soon as I left Yellowknife and then just like coming back, we're just a very well-known family, but like coming back and just reconnecting with my aunts and uncles and like learning all of these things and like learning about Mackenzie Island where we do a lot of our programming. Having my grandpa shows up all the time, like near every day to like get fish, and like it's just like, oh, Jonas is here, he's definitely gonna get a whitefish from us and leave, and he comes and he like says hello and he asks about my mom, and it's like these little things that are really special, and I had no idea could translate from my like film degree to coming back to the community, and just being able to do all of these like hands-on things now that I'm like getting the confidence and getting from behind the camera, because I feel like I've edited Irene's fish training video so often, her steps that she teaches for traditional fish cutting, and now I'm finally able to like get behind the table and do it with her, and doing all of these things. Like on the last day of camp, on the most recent camp, I collected a bunch of spruce gum to take with me back to Vancouver, and just all of these like little things that is just really, really special, specifically because it's, you know, it's my homeland, it's my community, and then being able to come back, and it's yeah, indescribable, really.
Yeah, definitely. It's really great to like being able to see you capture all these different moments, and like be like what you said, just like not just learning from Irene in person, but being able to see her and hear her over and over again. I think like for at least for myself, having watched my grandparents cut the fish over and over again, that's really how I've learned, and being able to do that with like videos of those people, I think like their lessons can be passed on to not only our generation but farther down the line, which is really great that we're able to capture all these little things. Kyla, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think like how I've been using my work to kind of gain my skills or get on the land. It's funny because I always ask Kelsey, I'm like, what do we do here for work? Because you go from, like Rena said, you go from the government. I went from GWT 9-to-5 job where half the time I didn't have any work or anything to do. And I was like, Kelsey, what do I do during our off season when we're not running really long courses, when we don't have programming coming up and our semesters are broken up into pieces? And she's like, well, you can do like professional development, which means going out on the land with an elder and doing different teachings. And I was like, no, this can't be right. Like professional development is like working on Excel forms and learning how to use Google. I don't know. And so that really changed and shifted my thought of professional development and development of not only my work, but myself, because now that my role at Dechinta, I'm helping teach other learners and other students. And so I find that in the first few years, I didn't know many of the things that we were teaching, and it was hard to be in my position, still learning while also teaching. and fulfill those kind of needs of the students. And so I really took it upon myself to learn more and be on the land more. And so I went up in the barren lands, went hunting for a week for caribou with all our elders. We went on a Dechinta hunt, and I knew I really wanted to go harvesting. I really wanted to see caribou, and that would be really helpful for me in teaching students, because we were going to have a hide camp in the year, that same year. And so I really wanted to be able to tell the students that, hey, I went up hunting, and here are the hides that we got. And now you guys are using these hides and working on these hides that you can take home. And so they could see the process of what it takes to run Dechinta programming. And also being like, there's not many women up hunting, and really being able to break those barriers for other women and show that we can do everything, and that going hunting shouldn't be a weird thing for women up in the barren lands, like with me and Justina. And Justina was always that mentor, that female mentor, that really bush auntie. She always bush auntied me. She was the one that I learned so many skills from. She was so confident on the land and so confident teaching, and really had the skills. And so I kind of built what I wanted to learn and work. And after watching Justina, and she was like a big role model. And so now we're going geese hunting coming up. And so there's all these different opportunities that we find within my work that I want to do in order to better myself, and so that I can be a better teacher. And even when I went up to a Klavik, I learned how to set muskrat traps for the first time. And then I came back to Yellowknife, and we were doing muskrat trapping with our students for 2 weeks. And I had just learned it weeks before, and all the students were like, "You grew up doing this, right?" I'm like, "No." I learned this like 2 weeks ago on a Klavik, reconnecting with family, and I fell in love with muskrat trapping. And then I was learning and teaching the stories. And I always love, and I think it was Elise saying that I told a story to Randy about muskrat trapping when there's too much CO2, so much, there's like an air pocket. And when you hit it, they used to like light it up, and it would be flames coming out. And I was just telling this to Randy because I just learned in a Klavik, and Randy was like, "I've never heard of that, and I've been muskrat trapping." And then Elise was like, "Oh, I overheard Randy telling your story to someone," where he's like, "Oh, I heard this. I haven't seen it, but I've heard it." But it's really cool to see how we all learn from each other. If I want to go set a net, I'm going to call up Randy and ask to set a net. But all of us in the family and within the organization and the community all have these skills that we're always open to teach. And Irene's always there to cut fish, and we're always there to learn from her. But being able to have a job that's part of your work is reconnecting and learning traditional practices is, I always say it's like a dream come true, because it's nothing like anything I've ever thought of or talked with others about. But I think that's what it takes to really get yourself on the land, is having a organization that supports you in doing so. And I see it supporting all of us in it. Even though Kristen's not at Dechinta, she's doing such incredible work within her First Nations, and seeing that transition of getting on the land and then going back home is kind of where I see myself returning back to Old Crow at some point. And I'll be able to bring a hide that I finished and bring a muskrat or a muskrat trap. But like all of it comes full circle, I think. And really being able to see the students learn what I've learned and taught them. And yeah, I hope everyone goes muskrat trapping, because that I can't even, I'm just obsessed. And I just got back from Mexico, so, and I'm still thinking of trapping muskrats.
Definitely, that's what I love about learning different skills, because I'm exactly like that as well. Like I immerse myself into that skill and try to do it as much as I can, because that's really how we really learn more about not just that skill, but also how our ancestors have done all those things as well. And yeah. Rena, you want to talk about like the differences in your position now and your position that you had at the GNWT?
So when I was at school, I was like early childhood education assistant. So it was like a preschool assistant, and I was like always working with people and children, and always just, and then in class, always around people. And when I started my government job as a summer student early in the pandemic, and we were working remotely, it was really like, at first it was like early in the pandemic, it was like just a really different change of pace from, I was like busy all the time in Vancouver, commuting, going to school, working, and then like always trying to attend like I had a cousin who was living there with her family, and she was always taking me to like ceremonies and powwows, and so like always just trying to be active in the communities that way. And so it was really busy. So working remotely, it was like I just could breathe. Like it was a change of pace. I was just at home doing school and working, and I also worked with like my childhood best friend, so that was really nice, and another like really close friend, and then was still in school. And then when I started full time, like I loved I mostly worked with like Indigenous women, and like they either had their masters or were getting their masters, and like my boss's Kyla Capley Scott, and she was part of the original like Dechinta team that's started Dechinta. And then the person who I reported to, she was like a student in the first cohort, the first Dechinta semester, and and so I just had this amazing team that I loved working with. They were so supportive. Like it was just different because I didn't grow up like surrounded by women who had gone to university, or like having their masters and stuff like that. Or like I didn't grow up like, I had never worked in a work environment like that before. And especially like I've had so many different summer GNWT summer student positions. So I'd never been in that environment in the GNWT before. And yeah, so like I was about a month in working, and it was just like I was so exhausted. And it was because I was just like not happy in that 9 to 5 job. And I thought like I was like naive. Like I was like, oh, it's gonna be such a nice break from working with kids, because it's like nonstop go, go, go with the little ones, and just working around people. And then I was like, oh, I'll get like, I'm just tired. I'm gonna get used to the job. And it just like didn't go away, and I was like, why? And I'm so grateful and privileged to work in this type of like safe environment. Like it's just and then like I also had never been in a position where I was like, oh, I have a degree, I have options. Like I don't have to take the first job that's available to me. I can, and I was just like having that realization that like, oh, I'm no longer in like survival mode of working to survive. And I was just like, wow, and that like, it's kind of funny because I was working, like one of my biggest projects was like, I was like about on the land practices and how important that is in early childhood. So it was like creating this document and resource for Indigenous children and families. And that was like, it was just like such a beautiful project. But it wasn't like enough for me to be in the office 9 to 5, like telling people like, or putting these things into paper. And like, as like a teacher educator, like I really do believe like I have like as teachers and educators, like we have a responsibility to share our knowledge and practices as much as possible with like especially Indigenous children and families. And so like the biggest difference is like I'm not at the computer like writing about how this is important. I'm like actually doing it. And like I'm just actually out, like it's like grassroots, like I'm working with the children and family and communities and staff at Dechinta, and we're actually doing these things that are really important for children and youth and communities. Like they're they have the opportunity to really thrive in what comes so naturally to us, and we don't, because it's a part of who we are. And in a lot of the research that I've read in school is that like that foundation for children is the most important, to have a strong sense of who you are and pride in who you are and where you come from. And then if that strong foundation is built and just like, you know, you keep like building it up, if you continue to build it up, then these other like skills that we need for the Western world will fall into place. But that identity was taken from us, and it's only just like, as Kristen said, like this is only just coming back to us, you know, to be proud of being Indigenous and where we come from and our skin colors. And so it's like I was in a position where I was like telling like people these things and like constantly like reviewing policy and like, this is what's really important, this is what's needed. And then now I'm just in a position of like doing it, and it's a lot easier to say like what is needed versus like doing it, because what I do at Dechinta, it can't, with the children and youth, like that can't really be replicated anywhere else. Like if we're doing children and youth programming somewhere else, it's going to be completely different and catered around where we are and who we're working with and what we're learning or what season it is. Yeah, so it's like day and night.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's like just that last little bit you were talking about with like being able to just really integrate not just how it is that we're learning with the little ones, but also like for us, I think it's really important, like many of us have already said and just like working on the land and with all these different generations, because like what we want to really see is just like a lot of how our ancestors have lived well before we were in our communities, in our towns and cities. And I think with on the land programming developed and run by Indigenous people, really prioritizes that, because that is exactly how our ancestors, no matter which culture we're from, that's exactly how they had lived. And like it was, they didn't have like a specific job in going to somewhere to work or anything like that. When we're out on the land, that's exactly like we were all working together, not just to keep our camps thriving and alive, but being able to work together with each other. And whether that be going out hauling wood, going out fishing, but hunting the caribou with their moose. We all had our own different jobs, not just one job, but many different jobs. A lot like what Kristen had also mentioned when she first started talking, just those different roles that we have in our lives. And like being able to see all of that continue to come out on the programs that we're doing, all six of us, is just like being able to continue on to have those opportunities to create a life like your ancestors had. And for myself, I think like it's really important to really have the ability to create a lot of that life how it was long ago, not just the connections between the families, but the connections between the communities. Particularly like our ancestors, they had to travel and learn different stories from different families, whether that be out on the Arctic Ocean or here in the Delta or farther up the river, where all of you all are from and live right now. And it's like being able to learn and hear those stories from all those people. It's just how we evolve, not just as a people, but as cultures, because we all live very, very similarly, no matter what part of the land that we live on. Like the only real difference is like the animals and the plants that are around us. And yeah, I think like being able to integrate being out on the land for all of us is a huge part of what we're trying to do now. And I hear that and this you all share. And I really appreciate you all being able to share your stories. And yeah, I can definitely sit down and talk with you all for the rest of the evening, because I love hearing the stories from you all. But it is almost 5 o'clock now already, and it's the time that just flown by for me. I'm not sure about you all, but yeah, I think for all of us, it's like important for us to continue to keep on sharing these stories, no matter who it is that we're sharing the stories with, because we all learn from very different people. And for us to continue to share these stories might spark something into those other people who are growing up or needing something else in their lives, so that they can switch not just careers or going to school, but like being able to switch their mindsets into a different spot where they can thrive more as an individual. And yeah. Any other last words from anybody that they would like to share?
Just messy Joe.
Must see Noel for organizing this.
Yeah.
Messy Cho. My phone has been on a stack of pillows in my bedroom, and I've been having to move it. I'm like, man, I've been on like calls where people are like constantly moving their stuff, or like, anyways, that's what was going on. I like ran to make this call, and it's my pillows. But it was amazing to hear everybody's stories and everybody's like experiences. It's always nice to connect with some Dechinta people. Messy Cho.
Awesome. Thanks again,
Messy
everyone.
Cho.